Good afternoon, everyone. As we embark on the last of the four foundations. And essentially, the Satipatthana Sutta invites you to again and again and again and again just be aware of first this, then be aware of that, then be aware of the other. That's where it's aiming us. It's pretty simple. The fourth foundation of mindfulness, you're being asked to be aware of certain thematic contents of your mind. I'll get into the details of that. And in Buddhism, the mind is not a subject that has objects per se as its content. We're really looking more at the flow of activities of phenomena and events in the mind, not so much at the objects. All right? It's a very dynamic view of the mind, is what we get in Buddhist philosophy. So the first foundation of mindfulness, we're looking at awareness of the breathing, of bodily functions, and the second foundation, Vedana. Right? We spent some time on that, and where we're noticing the affect tone, pleasure or displeasure. And before lunch, I had emptied my thermos, and I put some tea bags in there and filled it with hot water. And then later on, as I was working on this talk, it was time. It was all steeped. I opened it up. And I was really looking forward to it. There's a very pleasant feeling about holding this, opening it. I really like this thing. And then there was a stink bug floating around. And then the Vedana just took this, it just went south. So then I was left with, wait a minute, I've invested 3 tea bags in here. What to do? So plucked it out with my finger with the thought, hey, there are people in this world who eat insects a lot for protein. It's probably not going to kill me. But still, there was this unpleasantness as I took the first few sips, wondering whether I was going to get a little leg or two. And then it changed back. I'm enjoying it. So it's just the way it is. Kind of moves along. And in the group today, I used an example. Most people like neck rubs or back rubs. Most people, not everybody. But if I was to give one, it'd be great. But about the 5th or 6th hour, the whole Vedana picture would change for most people. It's like, get away from me. So it's fun to watch how that, the different stimuli, how that changes the affect that comes along through the senses. Okay? So these first 2 movements of the mind, paying attention to the body and then paying attention to Vedana, they're very descriptive. It's simply we're noticing the texture of the experience that's arising. And the third foundation of mindfulness, being awake to the movements of the mind, that's it becomes a little more nuanced. Maybe there's a little evaluation that's happening in there of the experience. So we're asked to notice, okay, is there grasping in the mind? Okay. Have your talons come out and you kind of grabbed onto something and you want it either in a great way or in a subtle way. And if that's not happening, you're asked to notice that also. Okay, it's not there. So, and the same thing happens with aversion. under that umbrella of aversion, there's what we'd call the various kinds of resistance. There's hatred, fear, guilt, shame. It's a pretty powerful umbrella. So the practice is asking if any of these energies are there, any of these flavors of aversion, is the mind activated with one of those flavors, which one it is? Or is the mind in this moment without aversion? Okay. But as you do this over and over and over, kind of exploring the mind, you begin to intuitively, almost on a cellular level, begin to know the difference and kind of what it feels like when you're in aversion or not in aversion. So there's a kind of evaluation that's beginning to form almost below, in the subconscious, so to speak. So we know what our world, we start to know what our world is like when we're beset by attachment, when we want something, or aversion, whatever it might be. There's a whole constellation of aspects of our world that we know about. For me, one of the things that I've been noticing and paying attention to is a lot of the political discussions that are going on now. It seems like more than ever before, there seems to be more juice in those discussions. And if I'm attached to my view, as the Buddha would say, the tangle of views. If I'm really attached to my view, there's a whole constellation of things going on. There's a tightness. My perspective is pretty narrow. There's very little spaciousness in the mind. There's not much room for learning anything new. The body is not particularly relaxed, or not relaxed at all. When you're riding the high horse, there's a constellation of feelings and experience that goes with that. As opposed to when I'm feeling more open, more curious. When the mind is more of the healthy don't know mind, not just dumb, stupid mind. I'm meaning the mind that's kind of open to possibilities. That's a humble mind that really gets that we can't know everything about anything. Yes, we have to make decisions as citizens, etc., but we really can't know everything. So we're gathering information, we make a choice, we do something. That's a humble opinion as opposed to, I know the answer to this. So in those situations, I know for me, my whole countenance is just, it's more tolerant, it flows more, I can actually hear better, and maybe even learn something. So the process is really more nuanced than just whether there's attachment in the mind or not. There's this whole, we're learning about ourselves, how we're operating in the world, by getting into the details of how this flows. Okay. Now, typically in meditation, we're told that we simply, when a thought arises, we're told, okay, just notice the thought, allow it to do its thing, don't grasp it or push away, and allow it to kind of move unobstructed. And that's basic foundational practice. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Just allowing a phenomena to do its thing without interference. It arises, it flowers, it passes. But in the Satipatthana Sutta, it's actually nudging us to be even more precise than that. So I want to look systematically on what it's asking us to do. and what's represented in the fourth foundation. The fourth foundation of mindfulness represents the total of Buddhist psychology. It has within it an exploration of the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense spheres, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. I am not going to put you to sleep by going into the details of all those. What we have is a practice that it's like a faceted jewel. You take any of these facets of that jewel and pay attention, and it opens into the whole pathway to awakening. So, but for your edification, and those of you who are not steeped in Buddhist philosophy, I'll briefly go through each of those, and I mean briefly. Well, I'll probably spend a little more time on the hindrances because they're a favorite of mine. So the 5 hindrances, the wanting mind or greed, the aversive mind, sloth and torpor or sleepiness, the third, restlessness and worry, the 4th category, and doubt, the 5th. What I've come to see over the years, or it's my perspective now, is that I don't even like calling them hindrances anymore. I prefer to just call them challenging energies. They all are linked into survival. The mind of greed and wanting, for us as an organism, is trying to gather enough resources so that we can survive and so that we can be comfortable, so that we can live forever. I mean, the organism has that intention. It doesn't have a lot of wisdom because we know what incessant greed can do. Okay? And the same thing when we look at aversion. Aversion is a protective energy. You know, when there's fear, there's a protective element to that, and it's been very important to our ancestors. These energies are all kind of in our brainstem. They're not going to go away. We're not going to eliminate our consciousness of wanting or fear, hatred, anger, which is also protective. Okay? And when we get to sloth and torpor, a way that protects us is it puts us to sleep. You know, we might not have to face a difficult situation or a difficult emotion. It's our organism saying, oh, well, let's just not go there. You know, I'm up for your comfort. So let's just go to sleep. And we all know restlessness and worry, and planning. Boy, is that a survival energy. Boy, I gotta line it all up. For me, my family, whatever the deal is. And so that energy is kind of pumping through us. But we also know the downside. I mean, to a certain extent, we need to plan. But when it's overcooked, look in our society, you know, almost everybody's on an anti-anxiety drug or an antidepressant or whatever. It's run amok. So the organism trying to protect ourselves, when these energies are kind of left to their own devices, there's not a whole lot of wisdom in them other than, I want to survive, I want to get you comfort, I don't want you to experience anything unpleasant, I want to gather as many resources as possible. And then the last one being doubt. Okay, well, what's the survival thing of doubt? Well, doubt kind of freezes us. If you're doubting everything about a particular contemplative art, well then you just freeze up. You don't do anything, but you can't make a mistake then, so to speak. Otherwise, although you don't get a chance. So doubt protects us in a way. You know, better frozen than foolish. You know. So attending and befriending. Um, that's our challenge with these challenging energies, to know them, and also, in a wiser mind, realize, hey, it's just the organism trying to do stuff for us. Okay, so I was a little greedy. I took that extra piece of cake or whatever, and somebody didn't get one. Well, there's a whole thing that we can work through on that, but it's like the gathering of resources. And mindfulness is the key to see it, and then we have some options. There's a little poem that I ran across recently. So, although hindrances, the word hindrance, they're obstacles to clear seeing, they kind of gum up our works as a contemplative artist. They're really not. They're trying to serve us. So this is called Because Even the Word Obstacle is an Obstacle. Try to love everything that gets in your way. The Chinese women in flowered bathing caps murmuring together in Mandarin, doing leg exercises in your lane, while you execute 36 furious laps, one for every item on your to-do list. The heavy-bellied man who goes thrashing through the water like a horse with a harpoon stuck in his side, whose breathless tsunamis rock you from your course. Teachers all, learn to be small and swim through obstacles like a minnow, without grudges or memory. Dart toward your goal, sperm to egg. Thinking obstacle is another obstacle. Try to love the teenage girl lounging idly against the ladder, showing off her new tattoo. Cette vie est la mine. My French is not very good. This life is mine, in thick blue-black letters on her ivory instep. Be glad she'll have that to look at all her life. This life is mine. I mean, that's a nice thing. And keep going, keep going. Swim by an uncle in the lane next to yours who is teaching his nephew how to hold his breath underwater, even though kids aren't allowed at this hour. Someday, years from now, this boy who is kicking and flailing in the exact place you want to touch and turn will be a young man at a wedding on a boat, raising his champagne glass in a toast when a huge wave hits, washing everyone overboard. He'll come up coughing and spitting like he is now, but he'll come up like a cork, alive. So your moment of impatience must bow in service to a larger story. Because if something is in your way, it is going your way, the way of all beings, towards darkness, towards light. It's never simple. All right, so the five aggregates, the five aggregates are often called the five aggregates of clinging. And there are aspects of our experience that we cling to, or we can cling to as being ourself. And there's one material aggregate and four mental ones. And they're all superimposed on things we've talked about. So the first aggregate is form, which has to do with anything material, mostly the body, but anything else material. Are we clinging to it as self or not? And then the other ones are mental. There's feeling. Again, that's Vedana. There's perception. As something comes through our senses, because of our history, etc., we'll put a label on it. We'll cognize that. And so, are we clinging to some aspects of what we perceive as self? And then there's mental formation, which is all the mind activity that Ruth talked about today, and we've been talking about. And finally, is the fifth one is consciousness, which has to do with ear consciousness, um, uh, nose consciousness, eye consciousness. And that's basically, if I see something like the exit sign, my eye is the organ, the exit sign is the object, and consciousness knows that. So consciousness, looked at in that way, that's another whole discussion, but if we look at it in that way, and that's the classic Theravada way of looking at it, consciousness is changing all the time. All right, so there's eye consciousness, and then the next thing you know, there's a bird or something like that. Then there's ear consciousness, and then might be smell consciousness or touch consciousness. I'm feeling my cushion, So there's always an organ of experience and an object, and the consciousness kind of holds it together. So there's the aggregates of clinging, the 5 aggregates of clinging, and that's a whole nother exploration for maybe another retreat. And the 6 sense bases are related again. It's the eye and form, the ear and sound. I mean, these are kind of superimposed, etc. The 7 factors of enlightenment, very, very interesting, worthy of a lot of time and attention. There's 3 energizing factors of enlightenment and 3 tranquilizing factors of enlightenment, and mindfulness, which kind of holds it all together. So the energizing factors are investigation, energy, and joy. And the tranquility factors are tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So it's those balancing factors. It's like the basic meditation balancing factors of alertness and calm. Okay, and knowing these factors, just as we would the other factors, are they present? Are they not present? And if they're not present, what does that feel like? And are there ways to enhance the arising of these factors? And finally, the last thematic is the 4 Noble Truths, which is there is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, there is an end to suffering, and there is a path to the end of suffering, which is basically the practice, the eightfold path. So that's a huge area of exploration. So everything under the sun is really included in this 4th foundation, as it's included in every facet of this gem when we go into it. So don't let that confuse you. It's just knowing that entering any of these portals or doorways, everything is going to open up. But to try to get a handle on the nuanced encouragement in the Satipatthana Sutta, I'm just going to pick one aspect and look at the 5 ways that we're encouraged to explore it. And because the hindrances are listed first, challenging energies in my mind, and the very first one that's listed is wanting, that's what we'll look at. But we could look at any of the hindrances, any of these other ones. We might make some adaptations, but we would kind of explore them in a similar way. So we've already mentioned, and the first thing we do is the particular desire activated or not? Do we have any particular desire right now? It doesn't have to be, we're not looking for just the crazed, lustful attachment type of desire. We're looking subtle. Is there a slight movement? Do we want to adjust our position for greater comfort? All of us, when we're sitting and meditating, there's those moments where, gee, I really want to move and adjust. That's a little kind of experience of the wanting mind, right? I mean, it's in our neurological system to seek comfort. We want to feel good most of the time. There can be wanting in our eyes. We can want to, if we're sitting with our eyes closed, there might be this desire to open our eyes. And oftentimes we don't even catch it, but we could catch it. We could see it. Same thing with hearing. When I was preparing this talk, going over it at lunchtime, it was obvious to me that there was. I'm sitting there and kind of trying to think this through, and there was this wanting to eat. I skipped lunch. I had some snacks in the room, but it wasn't really a lunch. So I could sense my energy body kind of moving toward food. And that's as simple as wanting is. Or our energy body moving toward wanting to change position. All right? In fact, close your eyes right now and just reflect for a moment. Is there any wanting that is activating, subtle or large? Maybe you want to run out of this room. Maybe it's something really subtle. Maybe you want to open your eyes. So you may have noticed that there is not wanting right now. You weren't able to discover any. So the first part of the process is to look to see if there's wanting. The second part is, if there's not wanting, what is the sensibility of that? Is it ease, peace, sleepiness? It has a flavor. Now, if you notice that wanting is not present, just wait and be awake to the possibility that wanting will arise in this moment or the next moment, either gradually or suddenly. You're kind of like a cat at the mouse hole, not stressed in any way, just relaxed back, but observant. And it's not too long before that little twitching nose and whiskers of that mouse peeks out of that mouse hole. And it's actually possible to watch the arising of wanting as it first appears, as opposed to when it's running all over the kitchen, so to speak. So the Satipatthana Sutta is asking us to play around, see if we can notice the wanting in the early stages. It actually gives us a lot of power, in the sense of seeing it early. We're not completely identified with it or lost in it. We have some choices. Okay? Kind of catching it at its birth, so to speak. All right, so that's the third aspect. You know, is it possible to just rest and see if we can experience the actual birthing of one of these characteristics? And now we're just using wanting as our subject here. Now the fourth movement, it's talked about in the Satipatthana Sutta, is to see if there is, or what the intention might be like, or to cultivate the attention, or how much intention is there to abandon the wanting when it arises. You know, can we be aware of the experience of abandoning, or letting go, or letting be, however you want to term it? Okay. You know, remember that we're talking about the hindrances, that those challenging energies, that they are impediments to clear seeing. They're very dynamic energies, and they obscure our ability to gather the power of the heart and mind, to penetrate clearly, to see clearly, and that's the definition of vipassana, to see clearly. And that's what this practice is about. So when these energies are up and about, restlessness, worry, wanting, aversion, etc., they do make it difficult for us to really pull our energies of heart and mind together and see deeply and clearly, such that wisdom arises, such that our heart opens to full compassion. So, you know, that they are energies, they are survival energies. We can know that. And we can start developing the intention to abandon or relax out of or let go. Ajahn Sumedho, who is a really fabulous monk who's now retired, he was American born, and then he spent lots of time in Asia, and then he ran a monastery in England for a long time. But for years, his only practice was simply whatever arose, he would say to himself, let go. Just let go. You know, whatever it was, thought, feeling, sensation, just let go. Just allow. But his mantra was let go, let go. So that fourth movement in the exploration, you know, has to do with what's our intention or inclination to let go. Okay. Now the last part of what the Satipatthana Sutta is asking us to do is what kind of attitude, intentional attitude, are we cultivating such that in the case of these challenging energies, it's an attitude that will foster the non-arising of wanting or hatred. And we can pause at any moment and experience what our attitude is. Is there wanting in the mind? Is there not wanting in the mind? We can become sensitive to it. And when we become sensitive to it, we're not completely lost and identified in it. So as you move through the day, you just pause. In this moment, am I wanting something? Am I feeling aversion towards something? It's informative. And that's the first step. You know, And is it possible to then release our grasping onto those energies? So in our work, we're not working with generalities, really. We're not looking at desire in general. We're in Vipassana meditation, we're looking at a specific arising, a specific flavor, and we're becoming acutely aware of it, and then we're seeing what's possible as it's moving through its cycle. All right, so to really sum up in terms of the fourth foundation, and specifically looking at the challenging energy of wanting. All right, wanting or sense desire. Is it there? First. Second, is it not there? And third, is it possible to notice its arising? To notice that little mouse as it peeks out. Can we be refined enough, steady enough, to notice whether it's arising? And fourth, what's the texture of our intention to abandon it? Abandon that sense desire, that wanting. Is it there at all? Is it strong? It's like, yeah, I wanna let go more. Okay. The sense desires arising, they don't have to rule your lives. It's a real challenge, around things like technology, some of our addictions. But there are possibilities. And then fifth, just notice how an attitude, cultivating an attitude such that it supports that particular energy not arising, at least in the next moment, but over time helping to weaken it. So those last two aspects, the texture of our intention to abandon it, to let go, to let be, and noticing how it is possible to cultivate an attitude. These challenging energies, that we all have to come to grips with and befriend in this lifetime, because they play out everywhere all the time. They really don't stand up to the light of awareness or mindfulness. That really shakes their power, weakens them. And so, as we cultivate the intention and the capacity to let go, and maybe we're practicing on little things. Maybe we're not up to dealing with our addiction to news or whatever, but we can find smaller things to release from, and build that power. So this practice is really training at a kind of a microcosmic nuanced level. And it's asking us to just dance lightly in this field of phenomena, and to be awake more and more on the edge of our experience. We're refining our awareness such that we're not always just waking up completely identified with something and wonder, how did this happen? What a mess. That we're able to catch it a little earlier. That's the beauty of mindfulness. It's not that we don't get identified, because that's always going to happen. But it's going to happen less, and we're going to be able to catch things a little earlier in that cycle. When Ruth was talking about papancha earlier today, that chain of thinking that can take us from a crick in the back to thinking we're going to be paralyzed, and then we're going to lose our friends, and we're going to be, living out under an underpass and homeless, and we can see that papancha begin to happen, and we can use our sword of wisdom and just cut that. Oh, I know where that goes. I think all these things, and then I feel like crap. And my energy's sapped, and And so we can make that cut, and then simply go back in the body. Oh, this is unpleasant. My back is hurting, and it's unpleasant. And it feels like broken glass being ground in there, and we can learn to be with it. That's our primary experience. Those other arrows and add-ons. If it was a football game, you'd be fined or you'd be penalized for piling on. So mindfulness allows us to see that chain, and we can cut it. We don't have to go there. This practice is like the transition. If you think of a child, the transition or transformation of a child who first has to learn to walk. It's unsteady and falling down, getting up, etc. But over time, that child can develop the refined capacities of a gymnast. We saw it in the Olympics. All children to me, but boy, they were doing some amazing things, and it wasn't that long ago they couldn't even walk. So, patience. Patience. A lot to explore, lifetimes of exploration. So I thought I'd just read you a little poem that's a lot of fun, and then we will move a little bit, these bodies. This is called the Very Short Sutra on the Meeting of the Buddha and the Goddess. It's by Rick Fields. Rick Fields, a Zen teacher. Thus I have made up. Once the Buddha was walking along the forest path in the oak grove at Ojai, walking without arriving anywhere or having any thought of arriving or not arriving. And lotuses shining with the morning dew miraculously appeared under every step, soft as silk beneath the toes of the Buddha, when suddenly, out of the turquoise sky, dancing in front of his half-shut, inward-looking eyes, shimmering like a rainbow or a spider's web, transparent as dew on a lotus flower, the goddess appeared, quivering like a hummingbird in the air before him. She, for she was surely a she, as the Buddha could clearly see, with his eye of discriminating awareness wisdom, was mostly red in color, though when the light shifted, she flashed like a rainbow. She was naked, except for the usual flower ornaments goddesses wear. Her long hair was deep blue, her two eyes fathomless pits of space, and her third eye a bloodshot ring of fire. The Buddha folded his hands together and greeted the goddess thus. "O goddess, why are you blocking my path? Before I saw you, I was happily going nowhere. Now I'm not sure where to go." "You can go around me," said the goddess, twirling on her heels like a bird darting away, but just a little way away. "Or you can come after me. This is my forest too. You can't pretend I'm not here." With that, the Buddha sat supple as a snake, solid as a rock beneath a Bodhi tree that sprang full-leaved to shade him. "Perhaps we should have a chat," he said. And then he began. "After years of arduous practice at the time of the morning star, I penetrated reality And now, not so fast, Buddha, said the goddess. I am reality. The earth stood still, the oceans paused. The wind itself listened. 1,000 arhats, bodhisattvas, and dakinis magically appeared to hear what would happen in the conversation. I know I take my life in my hands, said the Buddha, but I am known as the fearless one, so here goes. And he and the goddess, without further words, exchanged glances. Light rays like sunbeams shot forth so bright that even Sariputta, the all-seeing one, had to turn away. And then they exchanged thoughts, and the illumination was as bright as a diamond candle. And then they exchanged mind, and there was a great silence as vast as the universe that contains everything. And then they exchanged bodies and clothes, and the Buddha arose as the goddess, and the goddess arose as the Buddha, and so on, back and forth for 100,000 kalapas. That's a long time. If you meet the Buddha, you meet the goddess. If you meet the goddess, you meet the Buddha. Not only that, this. The Buddha is the goddess is the Buddha. And not only that, this. The Buddha is emptiness, the goddess is bliss. The goddess is emptiness, the Buddha is bliss. Typical Zen teacher, right? And that is what and what not you are. It's true. So here comes the mantra of the goddess and the Buddha, the unsurpassed, non-dual mantra. Just to say this mantra, just to hear this mantra once, just to hear one word of this mantra once, makes everything the way it truly is. Okay. So here it is. Earthwalker, Skywalker. Hey, silent one. Hey, great talker. Not two, not one, not separate, not apart. This is the heart. Bliss is emptiness. Emptiness is bliss. Be your breath. Ah, smile. Hey, and relax. Ho. And remember this, you can't miss.